also worries me, and I alluded to it a bit before when we were talking about the arts and things, is this sort of idea that you cannot, for example, depict the Prophet Muhammad. So we've now got a teacher who will probably remain in hiding in Batley in Yorkshire, probably remain in hiding for maybe all his life, for all we know. No one's coming to his aid. No politicians have stood up, from the main parties, if you like, come to his aid and support.
No, because they don't want to get killed themselves.
Well, quite. And basically, this is someone who just simply showed cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad to his pupils. I think he was actually teaching them about, blasphemy and as a subject. But therefore, what we now have is a kind of unofficial blasphemy law.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've seen people as well defending or saying, well, he shouldn't have said that then, should he?
I mean, I saw someone recently on GB News.
Yes, that was what I saw.
Very same thing. And it sort of is just, it leaves you speechless. Yeah. They will happily jettison free speech. They will blame effectively the victim, which this guy was doing on GB News. He shouldn't have said it, right? So basically, people internalize this. That's the problem. Mm-hmm. They internalize it. They self-censor. And I think that the threats to free speech that we're seeing, we might even talk about, when it comes to, all sorts of other areas, hate speech laws and everything. That is bad. But also this kind of internalized censorship when it comes to possibly offending sensibilities of, certain religious groups. You might know as well, and there's this rather controversial definition. It was passed by an all-party parliamentary group of what is Islamophobia. How do you define Islamophobia? Which is a made-up term anyway.
Obviously,
it's a pretty nonsense term.
Yeah.
But they said in this definition, Islamophobia is rooted in racism and, excuse me if I get the actual words wrong, but it's basically, and it's expressed as hatred of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. Now, that is a blasphemy law, that thing. When it comes to free speech, how would that actually work? So, for example, if you are against the wearing of the burqa, that could actually now come under that definition. It would be seen as an expression of Muslimness, would it not? How would you, for example, criticize or try to bring up, for example, the grooming gang scandal? All of these things. That's before you get to the Quran. Now, this definition has been adopted by the Labour Party, I think the Lib Dems, most parties except for the Tory party, and it's not yet enshrined in any law here, but it has been adopted by local councils, for example, all around the country. That is a direct attack on free speech. I see no other way of describing it.
I also take issue with this idea of Islamophobia being an issue with Muslimness. That ness implies that anybody who they might accuse of being Islamophobic has an issue with a family, say, who might even be quite secular, but has some Muslim-ishness. And that's such an unfair portrayal of those of us who are speaking out against some of the evils of the ideology itself. I don't have an issue with somebody who's somehow related to Islam or is from a Muslim family or whatever it is. It's people not adapting to British values.
Well, no, but the thing is that it's totally illiterate. I mean, because Islam is, how many times have people said this, in these interviews? Islam is an ideology. It's a belief system, right? It's a belief system, such as Christianity or many others, Marxism. And it's not about race. But this actual definition conflates those two.
Yeah.
It says Islamophobia is rooted in racism. So basically it's a catch-all. So your average person, everyday life, they might actually think, well, I'm not sure whether I can say that anymore, or whether I should say that or mention this, so I'll just be quiet. I'll just stay quiet. And I think that, we talk, or it's often mentioned, there's this thing called a chilling effect that happens with free speech. Well, we're past this chilling effect stage, I think. I mean, it's happened. So people are very careful about what they say, even privately. Actually,
well, going back to that Paul Graham issue and you going to America, one of the things he says in that article about what we can't say is if you took two people, but one of them went off and lived some sort of Conrad's life in Africa and then off to the Middle East and then all these different kinds of things, went to different places, different experiences, and then came back, the person who had just stayed where they are might find a lot more things to be taboo. What they consider taboo would be there'd be a low entry point for that, because they're used to a very, very particular set of circumstances. You came back from living abroad in a country that has much freer free speech, and you came back and suddenly you can see it in a way that I think a lot of people who are just going about their day-to-day business, don't want to cause a fuss. It just seems normal here, doesn't it? Yeah. But you came back and you went, bloody hell.
Yes.
That's how Americans view us right now.
Well, yes. Americans really can't believe what's happening. That also works. Your analogy there, coming back from travels, it also works in terms of age. For people, those of us who are old enough to remember, when in fact things were far freer,
Yeah.
And of course, that whole, the time before, if you like, let's say anything up to the 1990s, the early part of this century, that has to be kind of, it has to be painted as entirely wrong. That, okay, you say free to be what? Free to be racist, free to be sexist, all of these things. No, actually, just freedom to actually, first of all, have views that you believe and that can be argued with and disagreed with. That now no longer happens. I mean, I think in that article, he mentions a sort of 16-year-old girl,
That's right,
doesn't he? And, in this country. Well, the 16-year-olds are in charge, actually, effectively.
That's what's happened, isn't it?
Yes, because, essentially, it is a kind of juvenile thing, because with adulthood comes, nuance. It should come anyway. Nuance, it should, a diversity of experience should bring subtlety of thought, all of those things. What now we have now is a kind of, I always think of the Midwich Cuckoos, that book of the kids who are all kind of super brainy. But the fact is, these aren't super brainy, but they were sort of in charge, if you like. There's no question that a whole field of society is far more constricted than it was 20 years ago.
I think if there were...
I just want to add one more thing to that.
Yeah.
Now, there are some people who say that the reason for that is that actually, because we have multiculturalism, there was a time, when basically, like, again, 20, 25 years ago, where people, I remember hearing it, people say, well, actually, if we are going to have a successful multicultural society, we are going to have certain curbs on certain types of speech. People would say it very reasonably, and perhaps they didn't sort of realize what we were going to end up with. But they were sort of, in some ways, they were right, that the only way the situation in Britain can now actually go on is if basically people stop, from actually saying certain things.
Which is quite extraordinary that we've gotten to this point.
But we see it being played out, do we not, every day?
Well, people being arrested now for Twitter posts and things like that. One of the things I've realized recently about my in-laws, they're Argentinian, they lived through a dictatorship. And it's a funny thing, when you're just on holiday together with the in-laws, you don't think about it, but they actually grew up in a military, the military junta. Which was horrific, and people were just taken from their homes because they were suspected, put in a helicopter and thrown into the sea. Horrible thing to happen, but something that they all know is an expression, which is algo habrán hecho. Yeah, algo habrán hecho, which means they will have done something. That's why they were thrown off. People know that now in Argentina because it's so chilling, that expression.
Yes.
They would have done something. And I think that's where we're moving to now. When I tell people, oh yeah, but this woman was just arrested for Twitter post. She called the migrants, what did she call them, a swamp or something? Or
Yes, tramps or something.
tramps or something like that, which is a horrible thing to say. But again, yeah, they will have done something. Well, yes, she did, but not worthy of being arrested. But people just feel like as long as I'm careful and don't say such offensive things, I won't be arrested.
Do you remember that there used to be an expression in this country which everyone used in almost every sort of situation? I don't care, it's a free country. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
People should like, mate, it's a free country.
Yeah.
Never hear it.
That's a really good point.
You never hear it.
It was a bit asinine, wasn't it? Because it was often used to sort of like someone could slap someone. Like,
Yeah,
okay, mate,
exactly.
free country, slap you if I want.
But it was kind of one of those expressions that you just don't hear anymore because it increasingly doesn't feel free.